Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this morning to attend another session of our African American or Black Church Studies consultation. We are excited this morning to have all of our panelists, but we are also excited that each of you made a decision to come out and support the Black Church Studies program at Louisville Seminary. Okay, so I will go ahead and introduce all of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask them a question about their passion. What brought them here today? What do they want to make sure that they convey to us today? But let us start with Kerri Allen. She is a PhD student and hospital chaplain, and most importantly, she is an LPTS alum. Prior to responding to a call to ministry, Allen had her first career as a political appointee at multiple levels of government, including serving as a legislative assistant in the United States Senate with an expertise in healthcare policy. Now she's a student in theology and ethics at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary, working on that PhD. Amen. She uses her experiences to focus on the disparities in quality of healthcare for Black women in the United States. So we welcome Kerri Allen back to LPTS. The Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, the third senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, for now 31 years. Is it 31 years? Leads with a commitment to Christ, a passion for people, and a yearning for community transformation. To that end, he has grown Friendship West to nearly 12,000 during his tenure as pastor. He is an author, a radio show host, and foremost pastor. In all he does, he exudes the mantra of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, believing in the urgency of now, marrying theology with a call to impact our sociological issues. He serves in various leadership capacities for organizations who champion social change, such as chairing the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. He's on the board of directors for the National Action Network, and he's also on the board of directors for the Conference of National Black Churches. Let us welcome the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes. Our third panelist is Kelly Mikel Williams. He is the creator and executive producer and host of Black Politics Today. I went to the website this morning. It was my first time going there. There's a lot of wonderful information, so you should go there and see what issues he's bringing to the fore. It is the only online political talk show focused on the needs and welfare of African Americans. The show highlights what's at stake for African Americans politically, economically, and socially across the country. The Black Politics Today website presents viewers and readers with a clear understanding of the effects of public policies on African Americans. Black Politics Today features everyday people telling the story of everyday life and how various policies have affected their lives. Let us welcome Kelly Mikel Williams. So just to open up our discussion, because we want to have a conversation, but what are the passions that you each have that are affecting, that will, I guess, hinge on our discussion for African American churches as we quest to actually have our civil rights? The fight for civil rights began a long time ago, but we know that that fight is far from over. So what passions do you bring to this discussion that you can share with us that can get us started this morning? Kerri?
Well, if I could just open up by reading a few words from W.E.B. Du Bois, an excerpt from his credo that will set the tone on what I'm passionate about. And Reverend Lisa, forgive me for the exclusive language that I'm about to use, but I believe in God who made one blood all races that dwell on the earth. I believe that men, black, brown, and white, are brothers, varying through time and opportunity, in form and gift and feature, but differing in no essential, particular, and alike soul, and in the possibility of indefinite development. Especially do I believe in the Negro race, in the beauty of its genius, the sweetness of its soul, and its strength in the meekness which shall yet inherit this turbulent earth. I'm passionate about a lot of things, but I'm passionate in this conversation on civil rights in talking about particularly internalized racial oppression, the role that white supremacy plays in continuing to keep us down from ourselves as Black people through internalized racial oppression, and the role that the church has more than any other institution in giving us this sense that Dr. Du Bois expressed close to 100 years ago, and that is still so relevant today.
Thank you. And I am passionate within the framework of this discussion about the need for the Black church especially to serve as headquarters in the ongoing fight for social justice and economic empowerment and liberation within the context of our community. As far as I'm concerned, I best illustrated like this. A few years ago, I was in a car accident, and after the accident, I was going through a season of intense rehab, and during that season, my therapist, a brilliant sister, she one day just stopped me in the midst of my walking and said, "Hold on one second, stand up." And so I did. She then said, "All right, walk." I did. She said, "Stop." I did. She said, "I see what your problem is. You are in pain that I cannot correct because your structure is off. And until your structure is corrected, I can give you all the medication, I can prescribe massages, but until the structure is corrected, you are going to constantly be in pain." The body politic of the United States of America, it was born with a structure of white supremacy, as you so well said, that has left so much of this nation in pain. And until that structure is addressed, and in too many instances, the church is content through its charity and benevolence to basically deal with massaging and medication instead of addressing structural issues that continue the pain that this nation has inflicted. And so my passion is to prophetically, through social justice, witness, and ministry, address, change, confront, and liberate this nation and our people from the structures that continue to inflict pain, and it manifests itself in so many ways in our communities.
Good morning. Well spoken. My passion follows Pastor Haynes and Reverend Allen, because I created Black Politics Today for the mere fact that being involved in it in California, I recognized and realized that when we're not at the table, we are left out of the pie. We're left out of what is being divided up at the table. And Willie Brown taught me something, and I always reference it. He taught me his rules, and his rules is know the rules of the game.
Right.
Unfortunately, when the structure was created, it was created for us not to play the game. It was created for us not to even be in the game, because at that point we were 1/4 of a citizen. So we had to fight for even the voting rights or even being citizens to even be able to participate in the game, but we've never learned how to play. We've had districts crafted out for us in certain parts of the country or across the country so that we can be elected, but we still can't play the game.
Wow.
That's why you see what's happening to the president, and why everyone has no problem calling him out, calling him anything they want to, with no respect for the office. It's never the person, it's always the office. So my passion is social, my passion is economic, and my passion is political, because I would guarantee, let me rephrase that, I would assess that the majority of you in here have no idea what politics is, but you know what the results of government are.
Wow.
And because you don't know what politics is, you cannot play the game. Politics is a game. It's just like football, baseball, basketball. When you don't have a strategy, you cannot equip yourself to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. If all you're going to do is talk about it and not do anything about it, you're still in the game. That's why you have a Ferguson that has 70% African Americans in a city with a white Republican mayor who ran unopposed and had no one running against him. If you got 70% population, there's no way someone else should be running unopposed in my community. You cannot do that. So my passion is to educate you, to help you understand what the game is, how to play the game, and then eventually win the game so that you're not sitting back in the same position you are today that you were 60 years ago.
Okay. Well, let's go to Ferguson, shall we? Since you already alluded to it. What structural issues does the killing of Michael Brown bring to the fore for African Americans in general and in particular, for African American churches? Anyone can start.
Well, we definitely see the over-militarization of the police. We see revealed a history in this nation where one community, when they see police officers, they see protect and serve. Another community sees abuse, murder, as well as harassment. Jesse Jackson wrote a column shortly thereafter and said, don't trip on Ferguson because there's a Ferguson near you. And Ferguson is not an aberration. To grow up, yesterday I was on, I'm on Rick Smiley's morning show, and I was speaking of an incident that took place just outside of Dallas with a member of our church, and we're going after the police department to change structurally how they police there in Forney, because again, it's systemic. And he said, you know what, man, every time a police car pulls up to me, I get nervous. And that's the experience of being black in this country. A black body in this country, we don't see, oh, that's our friend, they're here to protect and serve us. That's historic, and it's rooted in a structure that shows up in their training, because again, even if that police officer is black, if he has been trained in a certain way to see us in a certain way, then the sad reality is that structure produces an officer who may look black, but he thinks from a white supremacist notion. And with that being the case, we find ourselves in many instances seeing police officers as enemies and not as protectors. And that is a structural issue. So when you look at Ferguson, the death of Michael Brown, however you want to put it, had to do with the fact that you have, again, 70%. That's insane. And 3 black police officers in Forney, where the sister got stopped and harassed by the police with her 4 kids. They don't have 1 black police officer. There's something wrong with that. And so that's why we call for, by way of structural change, the hiring, the recruitment, and retention of black officers. But not only that, and most importantly, that every police department in this nation must go through racial sensitivity training that is approved by the Department of Justice, civil rights organizations, and persons who specialize in anti-racism. Because until that poison is extracted from the structure in our police departments, we're going to have Mike Browns and Jordan Davis's and Renisha McBride call the roll all over again, because the structure is off and causing this pain.
Okay, thank you.
And let me tap into that, because I can speak to it from 2 perspectives. 1, I used to be a police officer. And 2, I've been a victim of a police officer.
Wow.
And my father was a cop. My brother just retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigations in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was a police officer in California. I was actually the first hire after the department had just been sued for racial discrimination. You would think that after that, they would have got their act together. I was number 2 on the hiring list after taking the test. And I tell you, I took the test just on the humbug because my dad was a cop. I was number 14 in the interview session. Then after the interview, I became number 2 on the hiring list. I applied for a police officer's position. We had police officer and patrol officer. There was 3 of us hired, 1 white, 1 Asian, 1 black. I had the highest score, but they hired me as a patrol officer. The white gentleman, they hired as a police officer. Now there's a difference in pay in that. When I went to the academy, I graduated number 3 in the class. Got top cop honors at graduation. I had more arrests in our training period than any of my colleagues. I had arrests for murder, rape, kidnapping, and child abuse. My white colleague got a commendation for directing traffic at a traffic accident.
Right.
I then, through my own demise, was working graveyard, was driving, got tired, almost had an accident, got written up for that. Right? I did not wreck, just nodded, caught myself, my training officer caught me, and everything else. So we're going through. So after I get past the training, they come to me and tell me, well, we're suspending you because your scores were not high enough. My scores weren't high enough? I had routinely received 7s and 8s on our training. My colleague received the same scores. And they said, well, we're going to promote him out. We're going to keep you in training. So after that happened, and I went on, I stayed on the force for about 2.5 years. And the tension just got too much for me to where I had to leave and file suit against them. 6 months later, a year later, after I've left and filed suit, I'm at a 7-Eleven, sitting there on the payphone with a friend of mine. They roll up on me. What you doing? Who you talking to? What's your ID? These were my colleagues. I said, first of all, none of your business what I'm doing. Secondly, what's your probable cause to ask me for my ID? Unless you assume that I am doing something wrong, you have no probable cause to ask me for anything. What you better do is go into 7-Eleven and buy your donut and keep walking. But what you have to understand is when you don't know the rules, when you don't know what you can and cannot say and do, they will roll up on you just like they will do anyone else. But like Pastor said, there's a difference. This morning I was at breakfast, and the server was saying to me, she brought up Ferguson. She said, well, everyone wants to talk about race. Everyone wants to talk about race. I said, well, dear, it is a racial issue.
I mean, come on.
How many times, and I'm going to ask you in here, how many times have you ever heard of a white, unarmed man being shot to death?
You don't hear about it.
I don't see any hands.
Right.
You have 1, okay? All right? How many times have you heard of a white, unarmed man being shot by a black police officer?
Yeah.
Don't happen.
Now flip the script. How many times have you heard of a black unarmed man being shot by a white police officer? Way too many. And the reason is because, like I told her, I said, even if Michael Brown, by all accounts, stole the cigar, by all accounts, was fighting with the police officer in the car, once he ran, there was no longer a threat. If you heard the video, the recording, 11 shots were fired.
Right.
11 shots were not fired at close range
Right.
to where it was hand-to-hand combat.
Right.
We are trained as police officers to fire 2 shots. Boom, boom. Center mass.
Right.
Then, after that, fire 2 more shots. If you listen to that recording, it was 6 rapid shots, a pause, 7 more. Excessive force, no matter how you write it. And it's excessive force because the danger was no longer there. Some will say, well, he beat up the police officer, but he ran. Now, if Michael Brown had a gun, he would not have need to fight with the police officer in the car. He would have pulled his own gun and shot the police officer. So because that didn't happen, there was no reason for that police officer to think, as we are trained to do, that there is a clear and present danger as he's running away. Because we are allowed to shoot him running away if we feel he's going to affect somebody else. But there's no reason to think that when he's running away, and then he turns with his hands up. And 2 of those shots went in his head. There's no reason for that. So when you have not had those experiences, when you have not lived in those communities or dealt with that, because even me, I get nervous when they stop me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what am I stopped for? And me, I have a tendency, because I know I say a little bit more than what you should say. But by the same token, it's like, what are you stopping me for? When I drove my Range Rover, I was stopped all the time. For what? Why? I can't have a Range Rover? I can't have personalized plates? So you have to understand the game. The whole thing about this structure is that the structures of the foundation of, unfortunately, our society have been done so that we were not included in it. That's why you have to be at the table.
And one of the prophetic voices in Chicago at Father Michael Flager, about a month ago at Riverside Church in New York, said that the system is not broken. It's operating exactly as it was designed to do.
Exactly.
And so it's operating exactly as it was designed when they first brought us over here in slave ships, right? And the, you talk about basically knowing your rights and knowing and your encounter with your colleagues. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of you read that there was a gentleman in St. Paul, Minnesota, my hometown, who expressed exactly what you did and then was tased in his genitals for going to pick up his daughter. And that continues to be under investigation in St. Paul. So, my point in going back to talking about how it is that we perceive ourselves, because we've been pathologized as products of white supremacy, because we've been pathologized, we start to believe this stuff about ourselves, right? So you have to be self-empowered, and you have to love yourself in order to challenge, as Kelly's talking about, challenging the system and knowing the game and how to play the game. Before you even get there, you have to understand that you're worthy to be part of that. Okay, and that's what I believe that the role of the Black church is. We need to have a spiritual path for learning how, once again, we can love ourselves. The reason that people that Ferguson elected, the elected officials, the makeup looks like that. I heard one report that there's about 6% of Black people that are voting in Ferguson. Okay? Now, why would you not vote? And we need to talk about why you wouldn't vote. When we talk about what the role of the Black church is, we need to talk about and understand why people aren't voting. Because they're hopeless, because they have intergenerational trauma that goes back centuries and continues to be passed down, and because we have internalized that to believe that if you know the game, if you wear the right clothes, if you pull your pants up, that somehow you are immune from this type of lynching. Because let's talk about what this is, all right? Because you can demilitarize the police, right? You can have all the gun control you want, and they're still going to find ways to lynch Black bodies. Because as soon as we set foot on this land, they were lynching Black bodies. And we need to say that that is enough, because we need to love ourselves. And when we love ourselves, then we know that white supremacy is not okay. And then we know that we can get to this next level about participating in the game. And we can talk about what that might look like, because right now we're so disorganized because of all this stuff that I'm saying. When you want to compare talking about the civil rights movement, that's something that none of us are even familiar with. All right? So when my dad was training at SNCC back in the day, and going through rigorous training to be engaged in the movement. People don't want to do that today. They just want to step out there and start marching without any understanding of what they're marching for.
So I want to push you just a little bit, because you told us that we need to, African American church needs to address the internalized racism that is within us. So what's a strategy? How can we do that? How can we, as an African American church, address those particular issues?
I mean, I think that the big thing is that what happens in the church, in the preaching, in the teaching, and in the programming has to be focused. One of the major focuses, I should say, is that component of, well, they're twofold. One, I think it's important to learn to be educated on what white supremacy is, right? Because we have become, and we get to these instances of shootings, and we experience this every day, and we have all these different names for it. But there's something that's still internalized in a lot of us that believes unless it's a hood, then it's not white supremacy. But then we have the structural violence, because what both of you are talking about is structural violence, of both these horrific incidents that that we're talking about, and the Ferguson is one example of that. And everybody in here can talk about the microaggressions that they deal with on a daily basis, right? So all of these things, and what I think that the role of the church is then is to both be preaching and teaching, one, to identify that this is a complex structure that happens in multiple areas of our lives, and not just simply is not simply about like overt racism. You don't have to be called a nigger for people to be racist. And so understanding that, okay, and then continuing the message that not only are you worthy to participate, but in your blackness you are worthy, okay, and that it is particularly embedded in who you are as a created being and whose you are, that you are worthy.
Okay.
And that happens in the preaching, in the teaching, and it needs to be a consistent part of the whole church culture. I worship at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, and that's consistently found in the whole church culture. And then in addition to that, I personally have a real problem with some of the preachers that I've heard in this Ferguson incident, and basically the politics of respectability, okay? And so, now Reverend Sharpton I love Reverend Sharpton. I believe he's been a pivotal part of the movement and continues to have a role in being pivotal in the movement. But to go into that funeral,
Right.
and to pathologize black bodies is participating in white supremacy.
Right.
And so when you do that, you are not empowering people to understand how they love themselves. Because you can have 2 Ivy League degrees, as the president does, and still be metaphorically lynched day after day after day.
Well said.
Okay. So any other comment about that? What can we actually do? What are our strategies in African American churches for actually helping people to confront the internalized piece of racism? Any thoughts?
Well, I'll just say as a pastor that I think it's important that not only in the preaching, but structured into the very fabric of the educational ministry, the discipleship process of a church, there must be, I'm not saying this to brag, but we have at our church the Howard Thurman Bible Institute, and the whole concept has to do with both healing from the damage of white supremacy and empowerment in order to, form this movement, this army, to stand against suppression, repression, and racism in any form. And so with that being the case, I think it's just incumbent upon the church to recognize its whole discipleship process. I love the way you said culture. If the culture is not changed, in many instances, the black church has taken on the theology and the Christology, the pneumatology, the ecclesiology of the white church.
Yes.
As opposed to being its distinct witness.
Internalized racial
There
oppression.
There it is. And so we have to be delivered from that in order to begin the process of creating this movement so that 21st century expressions of racial injustice, social injustice, we are equipped to handle.
Okay. So so we're here on the campus of Louisville Seminary, right? So how can we, especially seminaries, divinity schools, people who actually train pastors to go out into the churches, how can we help with this piece of it? When we talk about internalized oppression, but then also we're going to come back and also talk about strategies and issues from other points of view as well. But can we do anything in our education efforts in that vein to help confront internalized oppression? What kinds of strategies can we put in place?
I think first of all, you have to make a decision to engage yourself, because as Pastor said, and as Reverend Allen said, the cultural and institutional racism and internal things that you deal with is to do just that. You'll see it, but you say, well, I'll let somebody else take the lead. I'll let somebody else decide what they're going to do, and then once they decide what they do, if I like what they decide to do, then I'll join on. But if I don't like what they decide to do, then I'll just sit back and I'm gonna let them go out there and hang themselves.
Right.
The black church, when it started, had nothing else but themselves. And what they did was they took themselves and they moved forward by themselves, and other black churches together moved forward. Once we got to this point where we got this 501c3, we said, hold up now. I'll say one thing, but I'm not going to say too much because the media might jump on me, and that's going to affect my tithes and offering. Or they're going to say something else, and then that may cause some other problems, and I'm going to lose my 501c3. You have to recognize that the 501c tax law has nothing to do with you being engaged.
Right.
It has only to do with you being able to raise money, okay? The 501c tax exempt status that you hold as a pastor or a church was written and designed because they were scared of the fact that you were going to be able to raise money and then be able to put in place policies that will then affect and benefit you. But if you didn't know that and you thought because if you said, I'm going to vote for President Obama, I was going to lose my tax status, you won't say, I'm going to vote for Obama, so you don't lose your tax status. But then again, you don't know the rules of the game. So you have to learn how to read and understand that, hey, I can say what I want to say from that pulpit because everything that we're talking about is in the Bible.
Right.
Everything we're talking about is in the Bible. Okay? So we can talk about social justice, we can talk about housing, we can talk about crime, we can talk about abortion, we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. It's in the Bible. Right. Ralph Reed created the Christian Coalition and raised billions of dollars to promote conservative viewpoints and used it in the church.
Right.
And we sitting around saying, I can't say nothing.
Right.
Right.
And when you don't say nothing, you have no say, so they're going to do what they want to do. That's the old saying in the black community. Well, they're going to do what they want to do anyway, because you letting them do what they want to do anyway. When you are the majority, and recognize something, minorities, African American, Latinos, and Asians will be the majority in just 2 more years. 2 more years. Recognize something else. Policies that are created today aren't for today.
Thank you.
They're for tomorrow.
Right.
They're for the out years.
40
And
years
what you see going on right now with voter suppression, with ID laws, why are we paying a poll tax? Didn't we get rid of that 50 years ago, 60 years ago? Why are we still in a slave mentality, pre-civil rights mentality mode of operation? White and black should be appalled at the fact that we're saying, well, you can have a NRA card and go vote. But now my 75-year-old mother has to get a new ID because she doesn't have one to go and vote, and she has to pay for it. Why do I have to pay to vote? I paid enough. My ancestors paid enough to vote. And to have your brothers and sisters say, oh, I'm not with that. Recognize. I just drove down the street here. In this county, you elect your judges. Hello? You elect your DA. Hello? You wouldn't have a Ferguson DA talking about, well, okay, or a Ferguson mayor saying, we have no racial issue in our city.
Right.
Really? Come on now. The reason why you need to vote, the reason why you need to participate, because right here, these are the laws that were passed in Louisville last year and this year. How many of you know what these laws are? There were 500 laws introduced in the Louisville Kentucky state legislature. 587 laws last year and 597 this past year. 145 of them passed. How many of you know what they are? How many of you went up to the state legislature to lobby against or for them? 2, 3, 4. And there's about 60 people in this room. That's not even 2%. The reason why we are still affected by what's going on is because our churches, our black churches, with the help of some white churches, but we talk about black churches today, need to recognize and go back to where their roots were. Don't worry about your 501c3. It's intact. Because when it was 1960, you didn't have a 501c3. And you wasn't paying taxes then either. So don't worry about your 501c3. Talk about the issues and create a movement within your community, within your church structure, so that they understand that the social issues create the economic empowerment that also create the political results that you need. You cannot have politics or political, social, or economic factors that are not affecting us. My passion is to help you understand that all of them affect everybody. Social, economic, and political issues. Politics affects everybody in this country, everybody in this room, but it affects black folks differently.
Right.
At every level. At every level. So the black church needs to go back to doing what it started to do. Coalescing, preaching and teaching, yeah, but they have to advocate. They have to advocate for it. There's issues out there right now that the black church does not want to touch. They need to touch them. Because the same way you was charged to get out there and preach and teach and do it is the same charge you are to deal with every issue that's from Genesis to Revelations. And you have to do it. Because when you stand up for God, he stands up for you.
So you mentioned other issues. What are some other issues? So we talked about the militarization of the police force in Ferguson. Police relationships with that community are practically non-existent or just bad. What are some other issues affecting African Americans around the country that the African American church should definitely weigh in on? Just
housing,
name a few.
affordable housing, jobs, okay? Social injustice, criminal and crime. We have to. The church has to recognize that they have power. Black electorate have to recognize they have power. When we spend $1.2 trillion a year, which is now projected to be almost $2 trillion by the end of 2015, that's economic power. But when our net worth is less than $5,000,
Right.
there's a problem. We can spend $2 trillion, but our liquid asset is less than $5,000. So when Big Mama dies, we go into the church saying, I need help burying her because she don't have any insurance. Because we have not accumulated wealth we accumulated stuff that we throw away every 10 days. Because we buying Jordan X and LeBron Y. So when we do that, our perspective and our mindset is wrong. The institutional side of it is that, well, I'm never going to have or I'm never going to do. You have a Ferguson existing because they never thought that they would have or do, and they thought there's no way we're going to be able to beat him. So we let him run unopposed. I don't care if you think you're going to beat him or not. Somebody need to get out there and run against him. Someone needs to engage in the debate so we can understand what are going to be the policies and issues that this person is going to bring forth. When you have 132 bills passed in the state legislature on the House side and 145 on the Senate side, meaning there's over 300 laws, new laws that you have in your state, and you don't know anything about them, you need to educate yourself to know what's going on. Because when you don't know those laws, then what you have is us coming back saying, let's rally. Let's march against it. For what? Now you got to change the law. But you got to get the votes to change the law. You didn't have them first. Why are you going to have them now? You have to be able to organize. So the issues of homelessness, the issues of jobs, the issues of crime, those issues are social issues, but have policy and political and economic impact. Why is your neighborhood not with street lights? Their neighborhoods got street lights. Why does it take your neighborhood 2 weeks to get them? They got them done within 24 hours. Why are potholes still living in your neighborhood? Schools in your neighborhood still don't have the books. In Washington, D.C., we had to pass a law that allowed the school children to get their books by the second week of class. You would think in the nation's capital we wouldn't have to do that. They weren't getting their books until April and May. School year's almost over. How are they now getting their books, and then how are they learning? But you know where that was happening? That was happening in the Southeast, which is the worst part of town, east of the river. So why are the kids east of the river not getting their books until April and May, and they leave school in June? So what the hockey pucks have they been learning since September? And how come the parents aren't engaged? So you have a whole list of issues from education, crime, housing, jobs. That's the basics. Your street being paved, your trees being trimmed, your water working. There's people in D.C. who don't have internet access because they haven't even put it out there. So how are these kids learning? Every issue, as I said, every issue affects everybody. It affects us differently.
Okay. So, Reverend Dr. Haynes, you mentioned that one of our strategies should be the recruitment, the retention of African American police, and also the training, racial sensitivity or racial anti-racism training. Thank you so much for the police force to be done. So how can we as communities around the country help make that happen? What can we do?
Well, again, I think it's about what Kelly has been saying, and that is our own education and engagement of these structures prior to a crisis, prior to a tragedy. Again, if we are not informed as to what's going on, I love your question earlier about what the seminary can do. I want to ask a question because I graduated back in the dark ages from seminary, and we did not have, when I was in seminary, any courses on public policy.
Okay.
Right.
Now, I'm going through seminary to engage in ministry, and we have nothing on public policy.
Okay.
You talked about how do we address internalized oppression. Do we have anything that addresses internalized oppression? Are we really serious in terms of our seminary curriculum with addressing these issues? So the seminary has a tremendous responsibility in its theological curriculum to empower students so they can feel, okay, I am worthy of being engaged. I can go out here and mobilize communities for this kind of engagement. So I think it's very important that we understand Kelly kept saying it over and over again, all of these laws, that have been passed without our input,
Right.
and yet we will be affected,
Right.
sometimes infected by these
Yeah.
laws. And I'll give you another piece in Missouri that's reflected in Texas, because we went to Missouri to help them with this. And that is, Missouri, like Texas and most Bible Belt states, is inundated and saturated with economic predators. Payday, car title loan stores, pawn shops, rent-to-own stores. These predators saturate and target certain communities. And the sad reality is that, you know, it's not an accident. It's targeted, it's intended,
Right.
and yet it begins with the passage of laws in our state capitals.
Right.
And so we've been fighting in Texas and in Missouri for the past, 5-10 years to close the loophole that allows payday loan operators to operate as credit service organizations.
Right.
So you want to help me with my credit with a 900% interest rate
Right.
on a loan that targets me because I am desperate,
Desperate.
Right.
because there are no jobs in my community.
Right.
So that's a structural piece that reinforces internalized oppression. So for me, it's both and.
Right.
It's both empowering and healing us of that oppression that we've internalized, but at the same time, we got to make a move on these structures and policies that create this cycle of joblessness. So I've got to go to a payday loan store, and now I'm caught up in a cycle I never can get out of. If we don't address that, then as far as I'm concerned, we're just sounding brass and tinkling cymbals.
Okay, all right. So you have talked about that, said repeatedly that we need to know the rules of the game. Talked about that maybe public policy in seminaries is a good way to do that, but what about pastors who are already out in the churches? What kinds of tools, strategies, organizing principles can we give them, and how can we do that to empower them to actually do some of this work?
I think what you do is you allow them, I said it when Reverend Williams picked me up, is that the pastor may not have the calling for that particular ministry, okay? However, he needs to be open-minded enough to allow
He or
someone
she,
who
yes.
is, he or she,
Yes.
to allow someone who is to move forward. I had to move my pastor to that position because my pastor would not engage politically. I can't do that. I'm not doing that because he had gotten scathed after a sermon he preached. He had gotten scathed by the Washington Post, so he became, kind of dejected by that and said, I'm not going to look to mess with that anymore. So I had to encourage him and bring him along to a point to where he would say, all right, Michael, you can go do this. So then I started holding symposiums at the church and started bringing him and including him in it. Now he's more engaged in it and more comfortable with it. You have to recognize that even when your pastor is not there, if you have that mantle and that calling on you to be able to do that, or you have the resources or connections to do that, then you have to bring them along and engage them. So I think what you do is, going back to what I said before, is thinking back and going back to our pre-civil rights position of making sure that we take, and forgive me, Pastor, how many of you, well, don't raise your hand. Think of it this way. When a pastor has an anniversary, it's jam-packed,
Right.
okay? Jam-packed. And you'll pay $125, $180, $25, you'll pay whatever amount of money to go to that pastor's anniversary every year. However, when there's an issue or a meeting to come to deal with your social, economic, and political issue, 4 people show up, 5 people show up. More importantly, when there's somebody out here running for office, how many of you pay to go to that fundraiser? I'm not paying no $50 for no food. I'm not paying no $50 to walk up there and talk. Do you know that association and affiliation brings about favor in places you go? Because trust you me, when I'm sitting down with the president of Industrial Bank, Doyle Mitchell, and I have him on my talk show, when I go back over to let him know that Greg has been delaying my home loan that I've already been qualified for with my 7.7 whatever credit score, but he's been not paying attention, it's gonna make a difference. Okay? So what we have to do is we have to engage ourselves. The whole issue is engagement. So we have to do the policy through the seminary, through our churches. We have to do what now George Bush crafted, which was civic and public engagement. George Bush knew and recognized that when he reached out to the black churches and provided an umbrella for them to come in as a nonprofit and do certain educational programs and get certain grants from the federal government, that he was going to be able to do something. He went from a 6% black voting in 2000 to a 12% black voting in 2004. He recognized that if you provide some resources, that you're going to get some results. Not that the black church necessarily wanted to support him, but they did. Why? Because he provided some resources. Now, those resources could also be looked at as institutional welfare and everything else to now trap them into another system. So it depends on how you look at it.
Right.
But he did something that got a result that he was looking for. We have to be smart enough to recognize we can use the resource, but we ain't got to use the person that gave it to us. Okay? So what you do is, he didn't necessarily have to do that, quote unquote, because theoretically it was already there.
Thank you.
He just made it so that he could say the church can go get it, but the church could already go get it.
Thank you.
They just didn't know they could go get it until he said something. Again, we didn't know what was there, so when we bought into it, now we got trapped. And policies that resulted from that entrapment are policies that we're still living with today.
Right.
So you have to engage yourself. You have to recognize what public policy does. Public policy creates laws and creates avenues and then also shuts off avenues for you and your community. When you do not vote, when you do not participate in this game, and you sitting on the sidelines and clapping your hands when they get a first down or not doing something, you are putting yourself in a deeper hole that you're trying to climb out of every single election cycle. Every single election cycle. You have in the state of Kentucky 11 black elected officials. They're all centered around this neighborhood. 11 black elected officials. I'm sorry, not 11, 9. 9. And they're all circled around Louisville, Jefferson County, Franklin County, I think it is, and one other county, which from what I understand is pretty much all around here, and then one county that's closer to the State House. You got to change that. Lexington, you got to change that. You have to engage. You have to get your pastors engaged. And you have to go back to your church and create a civic engagement ministry. Civic and public engagement ministry. And then you go down to City Hall, you go down to county, wherever there's hearings, you need to identify somebody to be there. And everyone needs to be there, listen, record it, bring it back, analyze it, and talk to your congregation about what's going on. And then talk to your community about what's going on. Because if you do not do that, this country is going to be the majority of minorities in the next 2 years. African Americans will still be a minority within the minority if we do not engage ourselves. Latinos have taken over in terms of population and number, and they're spending money going to those fundraisers that we sitting there turning our nose up at. So you have to, same way you dip in your pocket to buy your son and grandson those $100 shoes, take that $100 and go pay for a fundraiser. Sit up there, eat that fufu, and listen. You don't need to say anything at those fundraisers. All you need to do is listen, because elected officials like to talk about what they're doing. And people who are dealing with the elected officials like to talk about what they're doing. All you got to do is say, oh, I'm a business owner. What business you in? Mine. And listen. Because when you listen, instead of talking about what you don't know, you'll learn a lot more from it.
Okay.
Now you mentioned the Bush action during his tenure, and and you all of us up here understand that was a project of Karl Rove's which basically was a project of white supremacy, right? And so when we talk about what we can do as educational institutions, be in the game, as you said, but also know what the game is that's being played so that you're not taken.
Right.
Okay? So if we go back, a couple thousand years ago, and you look at the crucifixion of Jesus, there were people surrounding him that were suffering from internalized oppression that got him crucified.
Right.
They're acting on behalf of the empire, and then thousands of years later, we're still acting on behalf of the empire because instead of blaming the empire, we allow internalized oppression and anti-Semitism to blame the Jewish people for being responsible for Christ's crucifixion, right? But that's what contributed to getting Christ crucified, was internalized oppression. And it's because that's what the empire wanted to happen. They've been oppressing people just as we've been oppressed in the United States, and then they want to keep us down. And so we have to know who we are, we have to know whose we are, and then we can start learning about how it is that you navigate through these things, navigate through these systems, navigate through the political waters. And the black church of the 20th century, people knew this stuff. This is, we're not talking about that long ago, where churches were educating people, and as I referenced earlier, when my parents were engaged in the civil rights movement, that they understood the complexities of the structures and the different ways that these oppressions manifest. So seminaries can be educating people in these ways that we're talking about, in how to engage in public policy, community organizing. Community organizing isn't just going to help you in terms of changing social policy, but we can also talk about the other thing that nobody wants to talk about, and that is that our young people aren't going to church, right? And so we've got a whole bunch of black people that don't even go to church, right? And so then community organizing is another tool to help you start to engage people, to facilitate a relationship with God, because they have not had an encounter with the holy. They haven't had the encounter that most of us in this room have had. Because, and a large part of that is because of their internalized oppression. So I was glad to hear Dr. Jenkins last night talk about the commitment to being an anti-racist seminary, because I think I remember having a conversation with a board member just 5 years ago about racism that was going on campus, and being met with a conversation about diversity. And so now that we have a significantly less diverse faculty, the other thing that institutions have to understand is that these issues are interrelated, right? So I was able to attend a seminary and have a Debra and an Elizabeth Walker and other professors, that looked like me and that had some of the same commitments that I had. And that helped what was already foundational for me, because I grew up in an environment where most of these issues that we were talking about were paramount. But then that allowed me to articulate all of these things that we are talking about through a theological lens, right? And then to be able to take that message in terms of building up discipleship, so that then, we're engaged in conversations that are helping people to understand how these things are all interrelated. So I'd say that, both the curriculum, in terms of how we recruit students, and we have a commitment to having diverse faculty, so that people like you actually are going to school with people and learning from, we have a Black Church Studies program, and so having Black faculty would be something that should be a priority of an institution that has that. I'm at a seminary with the Center for Black Church Experience that is actually run by a Louisville Seminary alum, and the faculty there, it's a Methodist seminary, and it's a pan-Methodist faculty. So there are not just United Methodists, but from the CME and AME. And, and my advisor, who was really pivotal in that conversation that Dr. Jenkins referenced a couple times ago, 16 years ago, when this conversation about being an anti-racist seminary in particular was taking place, Dr. Stephen Ray. So I think that it's possible that it can happen because we see it in some seminaries now, see both a commitment to diversity and anti-racism, and that is also another pivotal piece in this whole conversation that we're having. So the curriculum, the faculty, the student body, all of those things are really critical.
Okay. So now, I don't want to romanticize the civil rights movement at all, but there may be some lessons today that we can glean from that whole movement to help move us forward further into the 21st century. What might some of the lessons be that we can pull from the civil rights movement that can be helpful for us today?
Well, I think you begin with the fact that the civil rights movement changed laws in this country.
Okay.
64 Civil Rights Act, public accommodations. We are where we are because of that, bill being passed. 65 Voting Rights Act, the Housing Act in 1968. So you call the roll, and they had, as Kelly's been saying, the sense to recognize, even though the body politic of this country has been infected with white supremacy, if we change laws, Dr. King famously said, a law cannot make a man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me. And I think that's kind of important. And so with that being the case, they understood the importance of challenging, confronting, being engaged with the body politic, and therefore changing public policy in this nation. So there is a Barack Obama. Whatever we may think of what he's been able to do or not do, but his very election had to do with the laws being changed because of the civil rights movement. So they had an understanding how important it was to change laws in a country that was sick and infected with racism. They also were shrewd enough to understand the different nuances of racism. Malcolm X brilliantly said the problem of racism in this country for black and whites is that of the wolf that's always woofing, but you also have the foxes that are real slick. So in the 21st century now, we have the wolves woofing like, who was it? Donald Sterling. Mm-hmm. He's a wolf. Right. But because of the civil rights movement, the wolves are becoming less and less politically correct. It ain't cool to be a Donald Sterling today, okay? But just because Sterling ain't cool, it does not mean the foxes are not out there raiding and robbing us of rights and opportunities. So I think we have to understand that they were sophisticated enough in their political analysis to recognize we've got to change laws, but we also have to recognize how the system works. And the beautiful thing is, you're talking about, now again, like I said, don't romanticize it, let's be real. 3% of black churches were involved in the civil rights struggle. Okay, it wasn't the black church. Everybody in the black church, no, it wasn't like that, okay? 3%. But what does that say? It says we ain't gotta wait for everybody to get involved. That's right. Let's just go with who we got. And if we go with who we got, we can make a difference as they did.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts about that?
Yeah, and in terms of not romanticizing, I think that a lot of times what we do is we see the pictures of the marches, and we think we can just go out there and march, right? And we don't even know. We don't even know, right? We don't even know about the training that went into organizing before you got to the march, organizing before you got to the counter, so that you were prepared for the physical violence that was coming at you. And so I think that's another critical component to both not romanticizing the civil rights movement, understanding just how the depth of that movement, right? And understanding what went into that movement, and the commitment, and I would even go so far to say the commitment as a part of discipleship, that you would take time from your life to spend hours upon hours before you even went out the door to be prepared for whatever was going to come at you.
Okay.
Remember the Civil Rights Act was originally, the fight was voting rights. And the fight was to make sure we got out there so that we can now participate in this process that we have been excluded from for so long. So Title I was that Voting Rights Act. And when you look at it now, we're still dealing with that issue. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on. Don't let us not confuse diversity with anti-racism.
Right.
Okay? You can have diversity
Right.
and still have racism. Diversity is the political correct
Yes.
viewpoint. The racism is the institutional operation. Because what you can have and what you see going on, and we have to look at every aspect of our life, from team ownership, professional team ownership, and professional team makeup.
Right.
Okay? We have to look from corporations and corporation boards. Because those board members determine what happens in that corporation. There are the Fortune 250. There are no blacks on any of those corporation boards. None whatsoever. There are only 7 black CEOs at any of the major corporations in the country. That then tells you how that company operates and whose interests that company validates. When you don't have anyone of color in your corporation, on your board, in your institution, at your seminary, on your school board, anywhere, that then tells you whose interests are going to be applied. Your voice is not being heard if you're not at that table.
Right.
You have to be, even if you're the first voice, be the first one. Don't be radical, be smart.
Right.
Prepare. The same way you get up every Sunday morning and lay out what you're about to wear.
Right.
Lay out what you're going to say.
Exactly.
Lay out how you're going to say it. Don't necessarily be up there just to speak, but be up there to speak and say something.
Purpose.
Okay? With purpose. Because a lot of times we get out there and we just want to say something, one, because we like to hear ourselves talk, and two, because we're going to make them listen.
Right.
You're not going to make nobody do nothing that you ain't in charge of. So you have to, one, be able to recognize that when that civil rights movement happened, it was a movement that happened for one singular purpose that then added on to once they were able to accomplish. Take the small apple first. Then go after the grapefruit and the watermelon. Don't try to get that watermelon first, because if you're not organized, prepared, or even know what you're doing, they're just going to cut it up and feed it to you.
Right. Well, and I mean, you just articulated another a parallel to another economic structure that our ancestors are familiar with, and that's plantation slavery, basically.
Exactly. Because you can go out there and pick it. You're going to give it to them.
Right.
They're going to make 100. You're going to make 2 cents. You did the labor. They got the benefit. And that brings me to another point that we have to recognize too, is that don't let your gift always benefit somebody else. You go to work for somebody, they pay you what they want to pay you because they did not come and find you. You went and applied to them. So because you went and applied for that job from $30,000 to $50,000 range, and you got the job and they gave you 35 and you thought, oh yeah, I'm doing good. But they gave somebody white the 50, because you have to understand even that is economic issue.
Right.
If this young man, and let me use you for a minute, all right? This white gentleman right here and this brother right here, same degrees, same education, same application, right? He goes into that job. Now, I'm going to paraphrase. You may or may not do this, but I'm just going to say, okay? He will go to that job interview. They're going to hire him. They're going to offer him the job from $30,000 to $50,000 range. They offer him maybe $45,000, because with health care and everything else, it may cost him $55,000. They're going to offer him that job at $35,000. Because with health care and everything, it's only going to be 40, right? They're going to save money. So when he goes in there, if he negotiates, he's going to say, no, you ain't give me 45. It says 50. My qualification says 50. I want 50. They don't want to lose him. They're going to say, okay. They're going to say, well, no, we only going to give you 35. Take it or leave it.
Right.
And the reason why is because they know they got one more coming behind him that's going to take 30, and they're going to make saving even more. Know how to negotiate when you're going into something, because when you are asking, you got to be in a position to negotiate. But when they come and ask you, you got the power to say, no, you're going to give me this, or I keep walking. Because, see, I didn't need to come here. You came to find me.
Right.
That same process and mentality needs to be in what it is you do. So if you're working for the government or whoever, whatever company, and your talents are being raised, now you go out and you start your own business and use them same talents and go back and get that money from that same company as a contractor that they're giving to somebody else. Corporation boards. All boards need to have someone of color on them so they can have the someone of color mentality to know what to do. The training of the police officers. If it's an all-white force, their mentality is, if I see somebody in a black hoodie and he's African American, he's up to something.
Right.
If I see somebody white in the hoodie, he's cold.
Right.
Okay? That's a reality that they have ingrained in them. If they have not been a part of the process of understanding how African Americans think, talk, walk, do the things that we do, it's going to be foreign to them, so they're going to have a happy trigger finger and they're going to react.
Right.
If you are not participating in this process right here, where these 300 laws were passed in your state and you don't know anything about them, all you can do is react.
Right.
We are always a reactionary culture or group. We're never a proactive group. We have to be more proactive in what we do and how we do it. Lay it out, plan it out, and activate it. Because the Civil Rights Act was an activation of movement.
Right.
We have been a stagnated place. The church has been a stagnated place of comfortability because it's grown, and now we have mega churches and we're growing, and those are exciting, they're good, and all that is wonderful. So use the mega in your church to now bring the mega in your policy to change what's happening around your church. Because in most cases, in our churches, we're in a community that is our community, but there's nothing going on in it. We're reaching and saving souls, but we ain't changed the infrastructure. We haven't changed the credit lending and all these stores that are in our church. You can go down and stop the liquor stores from being on your corner. You can go out there and stop the credit lending folks from being on your corner. And you can go to the bank and say, you know what, I know some of our community has some credit issues, but you know what, if we're putting our money in your bank, you still getting some more interest from the federal government that you need to do, because every bank in America needs to do something in their community. Every single bank in America gets federal dollars, and they need to do something in the black community. Recognize what you have. Because when you go to the bank and they deny you, that's why they ask you on that form your race and everything else and all that stuff, so then they can turn it in to the federal government, because the federal government guarantees their money, right? FDIC guarantees their money. Every bank has a community development office because they have to do something in the community. How much has your bank done in your community? If anything. And you know why? Because no one in your community is telling them they have to.
Right.
That's economic gentrification.
Right.
Recognize that gentrification isn't just white folks moving into black neighborhoods.
Right.
It's more than that. It's economic gentrification as well, when you can't get your loan. When the federal government bailed out Wall Street and all the banks, but they still weren't giving loans to black businesses. There's social gentrification. There's economic, there's social, there's housing. There are a number of gentrification that goes on in our community that we don't know anything about and don't do anything about. And don't move out your neighborhood because somebody white moves into it. Welcome them, even if they don't welcome you.
Right.
Because know then that when they come, police gonna come. Your housing is gonna go up. Your property value is gonna go up. Your streets gonna get clean. Yeah, your taxes might go up too.
Right.
Yeah, your taxes might go up too. But you know what? Take care of your stuff and you'll be able to pay the taxes on it. Some states have homestead. Get it. Okay? Don't worry about who's saying no. Worry about who's saying yes. We have to stop looking at the negative of what we don't have and look at what we do have. We have power, even in our small numbers, because trust me, and it's a great thing. Whenever something happens and black folks speak out, it always gets attention.
Always.
Always gets attention.
Let us thank our panel.